Good evening. So we start with the second panel of the day on the occasion of Women's Day. The topic for today remains same on women's equality, not only a gender issue, also an economic issue. Uh, you would have seen our poster, which has the New York girl there. I heard that only the brave girl is standing now. The bull has gone away. So whether that's an economic aspect or not, you guys have to discuss that. So today only the brave girl stands at the New York Square. The bull has been shifted slightly. So I introduce the panel today, uh, starting with Ruby. Ruby Ray. She is an entrepreneur. She is worked with Microland, Xerox, HLL, Pepsi, Spencer's. She's a marketing professional, passed out from IIM Calcutta after doing her economics honors from St. Xavier's. She's also a NLP practitioner. Apart from that, you would see the Facebook flooded these days with awards she has been receiving on women leadership. So she has received Women of Substance Award in 2017, Women Leadership Award 2019 and 20 this year, and she's also a keen marathon runner. So that's Ruby Ray for you. Then we have, so how should I pronounce it? Shama. Chama. So Chama Mukherjee, she's an advocate in the High Court. Uh, uh, Being in this panel, one of the things which needs to be highlighted is that she's on various boards on for corporates on women. What do you call it? Internal complaints committee dealing with sexual harassment and all that. So she's been in several boards there. So she's alumni of Loreto College and LLB from Calcutta University, practicing in the High Court as well as I think Supreme Court also. So that's Chama Mukherjee. Then we have Janet. Janet is a pass out of XLRI. She's around, what now, 25, 24 years of experience, something of that sort. She started a career with ABN AMRO. She's worked with ABN AMRO, Nestle, and then she was with PwC for quite a long time. And thereafter, she was CHRO, Chief Human Resource Officer for Magma Finance for around another almost a decade. And now she is handling, she's the president of St. Augustine Education Society. She's on the board there. She's been on the board for last 25 years, and she's into the education entrepreneurship at this point in time. And she's a sports enthusiast, playing squash, badminton, golf in her free time. So she's also been okay. From an awards point of view, during her career, she has received several professional awards, which includes among 100 most influential HR leaders in Asia 2 years in a row, and 40 most talented HR leaders in Asia by World HRD Congress. So, and our coordinator for today in the second panel also is Shilpa Chakravarti. Shilpa Chakravarti is the uh, co-owner of Tribe, and the whole passion, whatever you see, this is all hers. She is also an HR professional, an HR consultant. She was with Ernst& Young. Then she was head of HR for Tractors India Limited. And then she's a director in Grey Matters Consulting with around 25 years of experience. So I'll hand over the mic to Shilpa to take the discussion forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarsi, for introducing to a very illustrious panel. And as like our first panel, there's a lot of diversity in the profession or the background of this panel as well, in terms of one from the marketing, one from legal, and one from consulting, and now education. So with that, certain things that the whole topic had been on, gender inclusiveness for economic growth. So let us, start with few, some very base level statistics in terms of a recent study, and which will lead me to the questions for this panel. In terms of that, the McKinsey study says there are four factors which is kind of acting as a bottleneck for women inclusion in the economic growth. One being education, and when we say that education, it is about, like worldwide, out of the 750 million people who are illiterate, considered to be illiterate, two-thirds of them is women. So one is education, definitely. The second one is about inclusiveness in digital and financial parameters. And when I say that, I say with the data that which World Bank provides, that there are about 190 million less bank accounts being opened by women as compared to men, which is the second point. The third point is about, of course, that women are there are 300% more engaged into than compared to men worldwide. Again, I'm not talking only about India, who are engaged into non-paying activities, hence which is not related to the economic growth. So women are more into that. And the fourth point is, of course, the security part of it, which is the the women security aspect, which is also in the workplace, which is also impacting the inclusiveness of women for economic growth. And when I say that the security aspect, I say that there are about 60 countries, defined 60 countries, who do not have any law for women security, safety, and any guideline for harassment, etc. at workplace for women. There are about 60 countries in the world. So with that backdrop, I will be having some questions to my panelists, and my first question goes to you, Chamadi, in terms of that, like this has started for the last 7-8 years. The ICC, this has started in the last 7-8 years. And from your perspective, from where it started to now, how things have changed or improved?
Thank you, Shilpa. This is a very tough question. Like the previous speaker was speaking in the earlier panel, that the end is very fuzzy. ICC in itself is very fuzzy, because by setting up this internal complaints committee, I know this sexual harassment of women at workplace. The very title of the act, when it says women at workplace, we are doing away with the men at workplace. Now, the statistics that you were talking about are statistics relating to people or to women who can be brought under that counting forum. There are more than 10 times more women who do not come within this counting, accountability, social accountability. They're outside the purview. And when we talk about sexual harassment at workplace, let me tell you, the cases that come to me and the incidences that I have had the opportunity of handling, I find that women who are accountable, who come into this accountability in the society, women who think that they are already empowered, women who are working, women who have found a place in society, however less or more, who are working. The moment a woman is working, a part of her struggle is over, because a woman has got a job. Whether she's getting the job whether she's getting properly paid, she's not getting properly paid, whether the atmosphere is right or the thing is wrong, that's a different thing. But when we are talking about those women who are not within the purview of the working women, and we are talking about the women who are in the fields, we are talking about women who are at work, we should remember that women who are at work also are working, who are at home are also working. So from that perspective, the entire act has yet to travel a long distance to, for us to say whether the act has, contributed anything to society or not. As of now, the act is such a preliminary stage that when a complaint comes to us, we have to understand the people who are members of the ICC are again people of a generation who do not belong to the generation in which the act came. The act came in 2013. People who the act came into being in 2013. It originated, the concept of the act originated in 1997. So the people who are members of the ICC, we are of a generation much, much older than the generation in which the act came in. So maybe our very approach to a nature of a complaint which comes may not be as as open, or may not be as progressive as the act is proposing the situation to be, as they want to handle it. So your question, Shilpa, I would say the ICC has a very, very long way to go. I just give you one example. There is this college, and this girl, she filed a complaint saying that the head of department is harassing her. So when she entered the room, the first thing that struck the presiding officer, and later on when she walked out, she told us, Dekecho, see what she was wearing? Because that girl, she walked in wearing a half pant, those ragged, torn half pants, and she was wearing a shirt. And the first thing the presiding officer said, don't you think they attract this? And that is, something, because I perceive that we do not belong to the generation today. Our perceptions are different. So when we talk about women equality, we talk about economic genders, we are talking about a perception which is not within us, who are actually facing the acts and the laws that have been made, who are going to hand over those acts and laws.
Very interesting insight, Chamadi. So that with this, I would digress a bit and move to another point which was about education. And of course, this question is to Janet as her current role as a educator and spearheading this institute. Is that Harmont? We are not talking about, of course, education here, of course, only the city, but also about the suburbs, where more inclusiveness and also the environment of education or equality in education we are talking about. How are today's institutions looking at that, and how are today's institutions driving that, in your opinion?
So you're asking about driving inclusivity for education, not just in city but also in rural areas.
As an from your perspective as an educator, not only from your institute but also other places.
Okay. So one of the schools that I run is not within the limits of the city.
Correct.
Okay. It is in North 24 Parganas, and so it's West Bengal pin code. Okay. So one of the schools that I run is not within the purview of the Kolkata city. It's in North 24 Parganas. And therefore the profile that we see of students and parents are very different.
Yes.
So my brush with the rural, I wouldn't call it rural, I'll call it semi-urban part of education, is that the mindsets are very different. And the way Chama just mentioned that, it's the generation issue. Here also, there is not only a generation issue, but a lot of us who run the education institutes, we come from a different background. We come from missionary schools, we come from a so-called privileged class. So we don't realize the challenges that they face. And therefore, it's very important for educationists who are teaching in this zone to build empathy, to build an understanding as to what they want and then cater to them. I think today, with all the media and so much available, educationists in these zones are also changing and they are catering to them. And here I'll share an experience, or rather an initiative that we have done. Before I give the example, let me tell you, last 1 year, we've been doing online school. And the kids are studying on the parents' mobile phone. Usually the mother, because the father's away at work. It is unbelievable how many mothers are also sitting and studying with the children. It's really nice to see. And a lot of these mothers, some of them, of course, the kids are first generation learners, so the mothers are not as educated. But most of them are vernacular speaking, Bengali or Hindi. So when the children are learning English, the mothers are also learning. So there is a quasi education that the parents are also having. So I think this online class has helped to educate, the parents. And the initiative that I'll share with you, especially for the younger kids, what has happened is because of the online class, the kids have not really been able to experience the teachers. So there is a gap in the learning. So we have started a program which we have called Engagement Program, where the parents come to school, not the child. The parents come to school and we teach the parent to go and teach the children. The parents who have come, it has been such an unique experience for us, because the parents have to also be taught how to access Google Classroom on the mobile phone, how to access Gmail, and they are so excited because they're learning first time how to do email, first time how to browse the internet, first time how to do YouTube. So I think, this lockdown in a way has been a benefit, where all over, and remember that famous idea ad where the mobile phone is kept and the teacher is teaching and there's that loudspeaker. So I think the empathy is growing, and you need to change and adapt to the mindset of people in these semi-urban areas, and use that to create your programs and therefore bridge the gap.
Thank you, Janet. That was very interesting, this thing. So with this, we'll just invite our fourth panelist.
Apologies for being so terribly late.
Our fourth panelist is Jayashree Mohanka. She's an entrepreneur. Uh, she's a marketing professional, passed out of IIM Calcutta. Before that, she did her schooling from Madras Christian College, and she's worked in companies like Everready and Anandabajar Potrika, and then she runs her own company at this point in time, which is into manufacturing equipments and manufacturing of equipments of bulk material handling equipments called Electro Zavod Private Limited. And apart from all these things, one of the main thing which needs to be introduced about Jayashree Mohanka is that she is an avid quizzer, and I don't think there is any quiz in this country which she has not won. And she's an alumni of Kendriya Vidyalaya. So I'll again hand over to Shilpa to restart.
Welcome, Jayashree. So we were talking about certain dynamics of, what are considered in a global study as impediments for inclusion of women in the economic growth. So one of these things was education. There was social, security in terms of safeguarding from the harassment. There was, of course, digital and financial inclusiveness, and also non-paying work. These are the four things which were there. So we just touched upon few things, and I'll just go up to Ruby regarding something a bit, again, not really pertaining to these four elements, but I would ask you something that the same question would also be true for you, is that you've been into marketing in an era, so both of you, rather, it's one of you can answer after the other, is that both of you have been in the era of marketing where it was predominantly a men's area, right? So, so how did it impact your career growth, one, and then how is it standing today? You are an entrepreneur yourself, and consulting many organizations on the marketing front. How is it now? Has the scenario changed, and how is it? How do you feel it now?
Start with my first experience of my first day in Eastern branch of Levers. In HO of Hindustan Levers, you have women, okay?
But in Eastern branch, I land up and I sign myself in with the security. And that guy says, "Oh, ma'am, you've joined in new." I said, "Yeah, I'm a management trainee, and so this is my stint in the Eastern one." Then he's like asking, "Whose secretary are you?" I said, "Mrs. Levers, Mr. Levers." I mean, they thought women in this organization can only be secretary and nothing else. And that I'm in a branch office where it's all men who work in the field. What would a woman do, kind of a deal? And at best, they would accept anyone in an HR role, not in a marketing role. Okay, and these have been my experiences, but over the years there has been a lot of diversity and inclusion, and some conscious, some because a lot of women also wanted to join the field. However, if you look at the sales as a profession, which is also a part of marketing, I believe, a lot of people still feel it is not for women, the women themselves as well as the men. In other fields of marketing, which would be the brands, the communication, the digital space, everywhere you will see a lot more women. In the sales, there is still a role that can be handled very well by a lot of women who are capable, much more capable than a lot of their colleagues maybe, but they wouldn't consciously take it unless they feel we won't be selected in these, but we want to be in this organization and therefore we want to take up a role. It's not the first choice in many cases. In my times, I really did not know. I wanted brand always. I was in brands. So, and then took up the rest of the marketing, including sales stint. In HUL, you don't get a brand unless you do a sales stint. And okay, another example I'll tell you. I land up, my first sales stint is in Bihar. Okay, so I land up and I'm straight out of college. So I have two sets of people reporting into me. One set who are almost as old as my father, in their 50s, mid to early 50s, and then the second set who would still be my age or slightly older. The code of business principles in an organization like that is very, very strict, where you had to be polite and courteous, but at the same time your boss would say your numbers have to be delivered, no compromise there. So it was such a tight rope walk. In many ways, I feel these are the situations which taught me to be the person that I am, and I always tell the people of the present age that you take up a challenge. You might think it would seem unfeasible to you, and there would be people your business partners who've been there down generations with that kind of arrogance. So you have to deal with all of it, and the way you deal with it will make you a better person any day. So that has been more of an experience. But nowadays, I think a lot more enterprising people are coming in. Both men and women are more aware, more inclusive than when I started, I believe. So that has been my personal experience. Ma'am, over to you.
Oh, please call me Jayashree. Yeah. Same question. So I started well before you. In 1983, when I joined this MNC, who I won't name because of the next line I'm going to say, they had the same rule that to go ahead in the company, you have to have a sales stint. You have to have a man management stint, as they called it. I was the first female management trainee, and they wouldn't give it to me. So I was put into this catch-22, and I left, and I was lucky that I joined Titan in the startup team in sales. Okay. And it was phenomenal because you were new, the company was new, and it reached a point when people would come to the office and they would see the secretary and assume that she's a sales manager because they knew that Titan had a female sales manager. So it works the other way around also. Yes, it was really wonderful. And what I've seen over the years, as you're saying, is that many more people are getting into it. So it's become a leveler playing field, and you're remembered more because you're one woman among many who go into the market. So they remember you. So there's an advantage and a disadvantage. So that's about it for now.
And this is for Janet. Essentially, my question would be that, in your role in HR, both as a consultant as well as practicing HR as a CHRO, is that how did you see it changing in terms of, openness, taking forward to what Ruby said, openness for hiring women, competent. I'm not questioning the competency part of it at all. How has it changed, or how in your overall tenure?
So in HR per se, what I can say is that it is completely dependent on the kind of business you are in. Still, there is some sort of a resistance to hire women in certain roles. So if I look at my, so I was in Nestle as well, so I had a similar experience. And all sales, mostly sales were men. So when a woman goes into sales, there it's like, oh, what is she going to do there? Is she ever going to sell? Does she know how to sell? So in sales per se, because it's a traveling job and you're in remote locations, there is a resistance, in hiring women. However, in Nestle, if I look at it, there were a lot of women in HR. There were a lot of women in marketing as well who joined with me. In consulting, it's a little different. Consulting as an industry is a lot more suave, or you deal with a different kind of clientele. So you're not dealing with the shops, and you're not doing the rounds in a van, which is in an FMCG. So there are a lot of women. And when you look at tax and legal and any kind of consulting, you'll have a lot of women, right? My last stint, which was in a Magma, again, which is a financial organization, because of the kind of business, I, as a CHRO, I could not hire women in the sales position because the nature of business was such. So I think now things are changing, that yes, whether women can be hired, but I think there is still a sensitivity as to whether women can be put in that role, not because of competence or any of those other issues, but just by virtue of the nature of business. And I'll share another experience of mine where in Magma, a lot of my women were in the operations function, because that was in the office running the computers and processing the files. I had an incident where a woman was a whistleblower, and I had this process there. So she blew the whistle on some fraud that had happened, and somehow that desktop got compromised, and the fact that she wrote that mail got leaked. And the very next day, this girl got attacked outside the office, and this was in Punjab. She got attacked where two people with masks came and stabbed her. But because she was a little athletic, and Punjabi women are also taller and stronger, she saved herself, and she got the stabs on her thigh. And when I heard things like that, I realized that for women working in certain environments and certain places is just not safe. So of course the story goes on a different level, but the point being, I feel as HR we need to be sensitive, and we are, that whether the nature of business can allow the woman to work, and if so, I think it's open field now.
Very-
That particular incident could have happened to a man as well. He would have also been stabbed.